In Newport News, Virginia, an outpouring of love and support for Abigail Zwerner, that first grade teacher that was critically injured but has taken a remarkable turn and is now awake in the hospital. Police hailing Zwerner a hero, saying that she saved lives on Friday after taking a bullet to the chest when a 6-year-old brought a 9mm handgun to school and fired it inside the classroom. Police say she acted bravely and got all the students out of that classroom. She was the last one to leave. Now, currently, that 6-year-old boy is receiving treatment at a medical facility. He is under a temporary detention order. Police say that gun was legally purchased by his mother. Whether or not she'll face charges, they say the facts of the investigation will determine that. In Newport News, I'm Katie Beck for NBC News.
From her hospital bed Monday, recovering from a gunshot wound, first-grade teacher Abigail Zwerner had one pressing question.
Do you know how my students are? She was worried about them.
Zwerner hailed a hero. Police say during classroom instruction Friday, a 6-year-old student drew a 9mm handgun and fired a single round. The bullet went through Zwerner's hand and struck her in the chest.
She suffered a gunshot wound, but she was still able to get all of her students out of that classroom. Mrs. Zwerner was the last person to leave that class.
Police say the 6-year-old brought the gun to school from home, the firearm legally purchased by his mother. The child now receiving treatment in a medical facility. Administrators back to the drawing board on safety protocols for lower schools.
I'll be honest, who would be prepared for a 6-year-old to bring a loaded weapon onto school or a weapon onto school and shoot their teacher?
Richneck Elementary will remain closed for the remainder of the week. Parents, grandparents, and faith leaders visiting campus, still processing the shock.
I've been good up until this moment. Now it's surreal.
An outpouring of concern for a heroic teacher and the little ones left to heal.
To have something like this, a safe place where kids are supposed to run with their friends, where they're supposed to pass notes in school, that's the kind of darkness they should have had to deal with.
When pressed about whether the child's parents will face charges, investigators said that will be determined by the facts of the investigation. Lester?
You know, I think we started asking that question right after we got the radio transmission when the officers responded. At first, we thought there was an active shooter type situation going on in the school. And when we were able to actually determine what we had, I think everybody took a step back and asked that same question. How does that happen? You know, we were able to determine what took place and how the firearm got there and as the investigation unfolded. But the big question, you're exactly right. And it's a question that we have throughout the department and even with our school system is how does a young man know how to use a firearm? And I say young man, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I say young man, I should say a child. We're dealing with a 6-year-old and it's just unprecedented with what we have. That's a great question. Yeah, I was able to meet with her family on Saturday afternoon. I thought that was important. They allowed me to go up and meet with her. So that was my first conversation with Ms. Zwerner, and it was just amazing to get to see her. Her first question to me was, "How are my students?" And that took me back, you know, the humanity. And then I got to see her again yesterday. I told her about this press conference. I asked her for permission to a lot of people have been praying for her and asking how she's doing. And you're right, she did take a defensive wound as she moved back to shield herself, and then the firearm striking her in the hand and then into her chest. So, but she is improving and she is in stable condition. So I think that is certainly a possibility. I've talked to our Commonwealth attorney here, Mr. Gwynn, at length multiple times, and he reiterated to me as we went over and there's still, you know, we're 3.5, 4 days coming up since last Friday. As the case develops and the investigation goes on, there's a lot of different angles we still need to cover. We need to check with Child Protective Services on any history. We need to check with the school system on any behavioral issues they might have and put those together. There's still 16, 17 children that we want to work with a child psychologist to get some statement from what they had. And at the end of the day, when that's all compiled together and the facts and what the law supports, the Commonwealth Attorney will make the decision if there are any charges forthcoming towards the parents.
We as a society are failing our teachers and our students by not offering them a safe place to work and to learn.
This morning, outrage and calls for change amid an outpouring of support. A packed vigil for beloved first grade teacher Abigail Zwerner, who many are calling a hero. Zwerner, who coworkers and students affectionately call Miss Z, is recovering in stable condition after authorities say a 6-year-old student brought a 9mm handgun to school Friday, firing a single round in the classroom while she was teaching.
She took a defensive position where she raised her hand. The round went through her hand, exited the rear of her hand, and into her upper chest.
Police say the shot was intentional, but can't speak to what was going through his mind at the time.
I believe that the actions were at or towards the teacher, but you never know how someone's going to want to react with a firearm, with students, and we're talking about a 6-year-old child. I don't know what all was going through that child's mind.
After being hit, she quickly ushered her other students to safety.
I believe she did save lives because I don't know what else might have happened if those kids would have stayed in that room.
Police say she was the last to leave her classroom, and when she woke up in the hospital,
she asked me, first question, do you know how my students are? She was worried about them.
Investigators say the firearm came from the child's home, legally purchased by his mother. The child is under a temporary detention order and is receiving treatment at a medical facility. Legal experts say it's unlikely the child would face charges because of something called the infancy defense that argues children that young are unable to form criminal intent. Police say it will be up to the local prosecutors to determine if the child's parents will face any charges. Teachers who work closely with Abby Zwerner say she was as selfless on Friday as she is every day.
You probably weren't surprised to hear her actions that day then.
Not at all.
A search for answers tonight after an unthinkable crime Friday in Newport News, Virginia. Police say a first grader shot a teacher, Abby Zwerner, on purpose.
Mrs. Zwerner was providing class instruction. The 6-year-old child displayed a firearm, pointed it at her, and fired one round. There was no physical struggle or fight. She suffered a gunshot wound, but she was still able to get all of her students out of that classroom.
The gun was legally purchased by the mother, police say.
We determined that the firearm was in the residence where they lived, and the child had obtained that firearm, placed it in his backpack, and brought it to school.
The teacher made it from the classroom to the main office despite a bleeding chest wound, according to a grandparent who happened to be there and administered CPR to the teacher.
She came into the office saying that she had been shot. She had blood on her hand and blood on her shirt, and she said that she had been shot. I don't know if she fainted, but she had fallen to the floor.
Here's what one 8-year-old experienced in another classroom.
We all stayed quiet. 2 people were crying. I will help them. And when the cops came, we were marching to the gym, and we were all safe.
A school employee rushed in and restrained the child.
The child became a little combative, actually struck the school employee that was restraining him.
And a SWAT team then secured the scene. No students were hurt.
But I can tell you that the individuals responsible will be held accountable. I can promise that.
The suspect now receiving treatment at a medical facility under a temporary detention order. The teacher upgraded to stable condition.
We need to keep the guns out of the hands of our young people. These are the things that happen when we have access to weapons.